My sister stole my fiancé and sent me a wedding invite. At the ceremony, she announced she's the one he settled for first. Everyone laughed, until my date stood up and said, "Actually, I'm her upgrade." The room went silent when they saw who he was. 3 years ago, I was in a stable relationship, planning a wedding, and feeling, naively, secure about my future. I'd been with Nolan for 3 years. He was everything I thought I wanted, a confident, articulate man with a solid job as a defense attorney in Richmond. He had a bit of that clean-cut arrogance, but I found it grounding back then. I was a pediatric nurse, more reserved, more practical. Together, we made sense. Or so I thought. I grew up in Roanoke, Virginia, the oldest of 2 daughters. Our parents were average working folks, my mom a public school teacher, my dad a mechanic who ran his own shop out by Williamson Road. My sister Delilah was different. She was always more beautiful than me, at least in the conventional way. Blonde, curvy, big blue eyes, a smile she weaponized from a young age. Delilah was the kind of girl who could cry her way out of anything. And growing up, she usually did. She never really found her footing, dropped out of school, moved from boyfriend to boyfriend, job to job. And somehow, she always landed on her feet, even if it meant stepping on someone else's to do it. Still, she was my sister. I grew up loving her, resenting her, forgiving her, and repeating the cycle. When Nolan and I got engaged, she acted excited. Maybe a little too excited. She hugged me hard, told me I deserved it, then whispered something in my ear I should have paid attention to. "You always get the boring guys. Maybe this one will spice things up." I laughed it off. I told myself she was just being snarky, as usual. But over the following months, I started to feel that sick, creeping intuition in my gut. They were too friendly. She laughed too hard at his jokes. He looked at her a moment too long when she walked into the room. At one point, I came home early from work and found the 2 of them having drinks in our apartment. Just the 2 of them. She claimed she stopped by to drop off a book, and Nolan said she just happened to stay for a drink. They both smiled too tightly. I didn't push. I should have. Around that time, Nolan became distant. His phone never left his hand. He worked late. He started going on weekend trips for work, though he never said exactly where or with who. When I asked, he gave vague answers and acted like I was accusing him unfairly. Then, one Thursday evening, he sat me down and told me he wasn't sure about us anymore. "I need time," he said. "I feel suffocated. We're not the same people anymore." No warning. No fight leading up to it. Just, gone. Within 2 weeks, he had moved out. I was devastated. There's no other way to describe it. The man I planned to marry, the life we had been building, vanished like smoke. I couldn't eat. I barely slept. I showed up to work on autopilot. Friends tried to be there for me, but I kept everything bottled up. Until the photo. One morning, scrolling through Instagram, of all places, I saw a blurry image on Delilah's story. Her in a bar, Nolan's arm around her shoulders. His hand was unmistakably on her leg. My stomach turned to stone. I stared at that photo for a long time. I tried to make excuses. Maybe it was an old photo. Maybe someone else took her phone and posted it. But no. The timestamp was recent. I messaged her, no reply. Called her, straight to voicemail. The next day, she blocked me. I didn't need more proof. The next few weeks were surreal. My parents didn't understand what had happened, but I didn't have the energy to explain. I think some of them didn't want to believe it. I eventually accepted that Nolan had left me for Delilah. I just didn't expect to be invited to their wedding. Yes, really. An actual paper invitation, hand-addressed, with fancy calligraphy. I remember opening the envelope and laughing, sharp, painful laughter that caught in my throat. They were getting married at a vineyard near Fredericksburg. 4 months after my original wedding date. There was no note. No apology. Just the invite. At first, I threw it in the trash. Then I pulled it out. I stared at it for days. It sat on my kitchen counter like a paper ghost. I wasn't going to go. Why would I? And then I met Ronan. He was a trauma surgeon, rotating through the hospital for a few months. We crossed paths at a late-night code blue call. He was tall, dark-haired, with a dry wit and a quiet confidence that didn't feel like arrogance, it felt earned. He was calm in chaos. And in those chaotic months after Nolan's betrayal, I found myself drawn to him. We started getting coffee after shifts. Then dinner. Then we started spending entire weekends together. I told him what had happened, not all at once, but piece by piece. And when I told him about the wedding, I expected pity. Maybe even awkwardness. But Ronan just said, "Let's go." I blinked. To the wedding? You deserve to be seen. Let's go and let them choke on their choices. At first, I said no. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. I wasn't going to show up to cause drama. I was going to reclaim my dignity. When the day came, I dressed in the nicest thing I owned, a navy silk dress with a high slit. I curled my hair, painted my lips, and put on heels that made me stand tall. Ronan wore a charcoal suit that looked like it had been cut specifically for him, because it had. When he walked into a room, people looked. But he didn't play into it, he just moved like someone who belonged everywhere. We arrived a few minutes late. The ceremony had already started, and a string quartet played softly under a canopy of oak trees. There were rows of white chairs, neatly dressed guests, and at the altar, Delilah in a fitted lace gown, smiling like she was already the queen of something. The officiant was halfway through when Delilah turned, right before exchanging vows, and addressed the crowd with a smirk. "Funny thing," she said into the mic, her eyes landing on me. "He originally proposed to my sister. But we all know she was just on a trial run." Laughter broke out. A few gasps. My heart pounded in my ears. But before I could react, Ronan stood up from his seat beside me. The entire audience turned. He straightened his jacket, looked at Delilah, and said calmly, "Actually, I'm her upgrade." Silence. People looked between us. Then I looked at him. Someone whispered. Then someone gasped. Because Ronan McCrae wasn't just some guy. He was that McCrae. The kind from old Virginia money. His father had donated half a wing to UVA Medical. His last name was on the board of trustees at multiple universities. And he was devastatingly, unmistakably not someone you'd expect to see quietly sitting next to the discarded sister. The silence was thick. Delilah's face paled. Nolan looked stunned. "And me?" I smiled. The silence after Ronan's words wasn't just awkward, it was surgical. Sharp. Clean. Like he'd cut through whatever fantasy Delilah had built in her mind and exposed the raw, ugly truth beneath. You could see it on their faces. Nolan's smile, once so smug, was frozen, half hung, half fallen. Delilah blinked rapidly, like she couldn't quite process what had happened, like she was trying to mentally rework the scene in real time and failing. For a moment, no one knew what to do. The officiant looked between the couple and us, unsure whether to continue. A few guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A woman in the second row leaned toward her husband and whispered something behind her hand. And then Ronan calmly sat back down, like he hadn't just dropped a social explosive on the entire wedding. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Delilah tried to recover. She let out this high, forced laugh and said something about family being unpredictable, but her voice cracked. She rushed through her vows after that, barely making eye contact with Nolan. I noticed something then. Nolan didn't look at her with the same spark I used to see. He looked blank. Or maybe calculating. Like a man realizing he'd traded substance for sparkle and was starting to regret it. The ceremony wrapped up awkwardly. There was a limp round of applause, but but most people kept glancing our way, eyes darting between me and Ronan. It didn't feel triumphant, exactly. Just quiet. Controlled. And that was more satisfying than any scene I could have made. We moved with the rest of the guests into the reception hall. The venue had clearly cost a fortune, white roses cascading off every surface, crystal glasses, a string trio playing classical covers of pop songs. There was a seating chart, and of course, I had been assigned the farthest table from the bridal party, next to some cousin I hadn't seen since I was 12 and a woman who kept mispronouncing my name. Ronan didn't seem to mind. He sat beside me, casually sipping wine and asking questions about the people around us like he was collecting data. I realized, halfway through the salad course, that he wasn't just there for support. He was studying them. The whole dynamic. And I knew what he was doing, giving me the chance to take it all in before deciding how I wanted to respond, or if I even wanted to. The toast started. Her maid of honor, a girl I vaguely remembered from high school, gave a sloppy, rambling speech about loyalty and finding your person. It felt pointed. The crowd offered polite claps. Then came Nolan's best man, one of his college friends, a stocky guy who'd always seemed a little too impressed with his own jokes. His speech was worse. He made an offhand reference to how sometimes the second time around is the charm, and the audience laughed again, like they were trying to revive the earlier sting of Delilah's comment. I took a long sip of wine. Then Delilah stood up. "I just want to say something real quick," she said, her voice louder than it needed to be. The room quieted down again. "I know today might have surprised some people," she began, eyes sweeping the crowd, clearly trying to frame herself as bold and honest. "But love doesn't always happen the way you expect. Sometimes you don't get it right the first time, and that's okay." She turned slightly in our direction, her eyes flicked right over me and landed on Ronan. "But when you know, you know. And Nolan. I just want to thank you for seeing me. For choosing me." There it was again. That performative spite, that need to make sure everyone in the room knew she thought she'd won. It wasn't enough to marry him. She needed to twist the blade. Ronan leaned in toward me, quietly. "She's exhausted," he murmured. I bit back a smile. When the dancing started, Ronan took my hand and pulled me onto the floor. A slow song played. It should have been uncomfortable, being there, being visible. But it wasn't. I felt tall in my heels, steady in my own skin for the first time in years. I danced with Ronan, not looking toward the head table, but feeling their eyes on us anyway. Halfway through the dance, Nolan approached. It was subtle. He didn't come directly to us, not right away. He lingered near the bar, then drifted closer. Eventually, he cut in just enough to catch my eye. "Can we talk for a second?" he asked. Ronan looked at me. I gave a slight nod. He stepped back, and I followed Nolan a few feet away to a quiet corner by the back entrance. He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in months. "You look different," he said. "I am," I said. He shifted uncomfortably, hands in his pockets. "I didn't think you'd come." I almost didn't. I know things happened fast. Between me and Delilah. I didn't answer. "She came to me after you and I split. She said she needed someone. I didn't plan for it to happen like this." I looked at him evenly. "But it did." He nodded slowly. "I guess I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. For how I handled everything. You didn't deserve that." I believed him. Or at least, I believed that he believed it, in that moment. But I also knew it didn't matter anymore. "You could have just told me," I said. "You didn't have to lie. Or hide it. You could have left clean." "I know," he said, eyes lowered. "I didn't offer forgiveness. I didn't need to." He wasn't asking for it. He was just trying to rewrite a little of the story to make himself the kind of man who came clean. But I knew better. Ronan reappeared a moment later, and I turned toward him without a word. Nolan stepped back. As the night wore on, the wedding went from stiff to sloppy. People drank too much. Delilah kept checking her phone. Nolan disappeared for long stretches of time. I didn't care. I danced. I laughed with strangers. I let Ronan pull me outside where the vineyard's garden was lit with soft golden bulbs. You did good, he said. You didn't flinch. I looked up at him, the Virginia night warm against my shoulders. I think I finally got tired of being the one who stays quiet. He smiled. Good. Because that was never your story to begin with. We stayed outside for a while. The music and laughter floated through the open doors behind us, muffled now by distance and grapevines. I leaned against the low stone wall, looking out over the rows of Cabernet grapes stretching into the dark. It was quiet out there. Still. The way I like it. Ronan stood close, not touching, just present. That was one of the things I'd grown to appreciate about him. Not everything had to be filled with noise or movement. He gave space like a gift. I think she thought I'd cry, I said, finally. He looked over. She did everything short of choreographing your meltdown. I shook my head, half smiling. That was always Delilah. She didn't just want something, she wanted to be seen having it. Preferably by people who once had it first. We fell silent again. The stars were beginning to push through the dark velvet sky. I don't hate her, I said, and I meant it, though the words felt strange leaving my mouth. I wish I did. It'd be easier. But I mostly feel tired. She's always been like this? I nodded. Since we were kids. She'd get into fights at school, take my clothes, lie to our parents, make scenes at every holiday dinner. But everyone always forgave her. That's just Delilah, they'd say. Like it excused everything. And you? I was the fixer. I cleaned up the mess. Said sorry when she wouldn't. Let things go. Because fighting her felt like trying to put out a fire with your hands. She probably counted on that. Of course she did. Ronan didn't respond right away. He just exhaled softly, like he was holding back what he really wanted to say. And maybe that was for the best. Because I wasn't looking for someone to rage on my behalf. I just needed someone who didn't make me feel small. Eventually, we went back inside. The reception had shifted into the chaos phase, ties were loosened, shoes abandoned, the open bar doing its job a little too well. I noticed Nolan and Delilah sitting apart. Not in a dramatic, storm-out way, more like two people realizing the buzz had worn off and now they had to face the reality of the marriage they'd scrambled to build. They barely looked at each other. Delilah kept checking her phone, frowning at something, then looking up like she expected someone to approach her with a compliment that wasn't coming. Nolan had a glass of scotch he wasn't drinking. His best man was at the bar, chatting up a bridesmaid. The table of Nolan's work colleagues looked bored. Everything that was supposed to feel like a celebration now felt like theater. And not very good theater at that. We stayed another hour or so. I spoke with a few distant cousins I hadn't seen in years, caught up with an old neighbor who'd moved to D.C. I could tell some people were curious, why I came, why I brought someone like Ronan, how I wasn't a mess of tears and public breakdowns. Let them wonder. Ronan never left my side. Occasionally someone would ask what he did, and when he answered, there'd be this small flicker of recognition in their eyes, followed by a change in tone. Some of them tried to act casual, others leaned into it, asking if he knew this person or that. He handled them all with grace, but it was clear he saw right through them. I caught Delilah staring more than once. Once, I saw her walking toward me. I braced. But she stopped short. Turned. Walked away. Maybe she sensed that the power had shifted. Or maybe she knew she couldn't control the narrative anymore. Either way, she never said a word to me the entire night. Eventually, Ronan and I made our way toward the exit. The valet line was short. As we waited, I looked back at the glowing reception hall. People were dancing, laughing, posing for photos in front of the faux greenery wall that said "Forever Starts Now" in gold cursive. It looked like a wedding. But it didn't feel like one. Ronan turned to me. "Anything else you want to do before we go?" I looked back once more. Then I shook my head. "No. I've seen enough." Later, in the car, driving down the winding road away from the vineyard, I finally exhaled. Not just a breath, but something deeper. Something I didn't even realize I'd been holding since the day Nolan left, since the moment I saw that photo on Delilah's feed. "Thank you," I said quietly. "You don't have to thank me." "I do. Not just for coming. For not treating me like I was broken." He glanced over. "You weren't. You were rebuilding. It's strange how sometimes the people who hurt you the most aren't strangers. They're the ones who were supposed to know you best. And when they betray you, it's not just the heartbreak, it's the humiliation. The fear that everyone else saw something you didn't." But that night, as we drove through the quiet Virginia hills, I realized I wasn't ashamed anymore. Delilah didn't win. She just ended up exactly where she always had, chasing someone else's story and mistaking attention for affection. And me? I was finally writing my own. We got back to the hotel close to midnight. It was a boutique place in downtown Fredericksburg, quiet and warm, with brick walls and creaky wooden floors. Ronan handed the keys to the valet and offered me his arm as we walked inside. I took one last glance at the quiet street before stepping into the elevator. I didn't know it yet, but the ending was already starting to write itself. The next morning, I woke up early. Ronan was still asleep, one arm over his eyes to block the morning light. I slipped out of bed and stood at the window. The sunrise was muted, pink and gold bleeding into the city skyline. It felt like a reset. I didn't hear from Delilah for a full week. Not a single message. I wasn't surprised. She'd never been the type to address things head-on when they didn't go her way. But I did hear from other people. The first was an email from one of Nolan's colleagues, a woman named Ray I'd met at a couple of firm events. She reached out to say she hoped I was well and to mention, almost as an afterthought, that people at the firm were still whispering about the wedding. Apparently, Ronan's name had caused a stir. Several of Nolan's clients were longtime donors to McCrae-funded initiatives. Word had gotten out that the ex at the wedding wasn't just some random woman Nolan left behind, but that she'd landed on her feet. Stronger. Elevated. I didn't intend for it to ripple out like that. But it did. And it kept rippling. Turns out, Nolan's career wasn't as bulletproof as he liked to pretend. Several of his cases depended on a careful public image. The firm prided itself on integrity, discretion. When clients began to question why a senior associate had publicly humiliated a former fiancé at his own wedding, things got complicated. Then came the rumors. I didn't start them, but I didn't correct them either. That Delilah had pursued Nolan while I was still engaged. That she had boasted about it. That she orchestrated the wedding date to coincide with the one I'd planned. That she invited me to rub it in. And that I'd shown up looking like a movie star, with someone better, richer, more accomplished, and embarrassed them both without lifting a finger. I didn't have to say a word. Other people did it for me. The final blow came 6 weeks later. Delilah called. Not a text. Not a passive-aggressive Instagram caption. An actual call. It was late. I saw her name flash on my screen and debated ignoring it. But I answered. "Hey." Silence on the other end. "Delilah? I need to talk to you," she said, voice thin, almost hoarse. I sat down. "About?" She hesitated. He's leaving." I didn't even need to ask who. "Nolan?" I said anyway. "Yeah." Her voice cracked. "He said he made a mistake." I didn't respond. "He said I pushed him into things. That I used him to get at you. He told me he never even wanted to marry me." Still, I said nothing. She continued, spiraling. He moved out. Took all his stuff. He said I ruined his reputation, that his partners don't trust him. He blames me for everything. I closed my eyes and leaned my head back. She went on. I didn't think it would turn out like this. And maybe, for the first time in her life, she meant it. But what could I say to that? There was no apology. No self-awareness. Just regret that her scheme hadn't paid off. I'm sorry you're hurting, I said, finally. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was more than she deserved. Do you think there's any way we could talk? Like really talk? Try again? I waited a long time before answering. You know, I spent years putting you first, I said quietly. Even when you made my life heck, I defended you. I let things go. I tried to be the bigger person because I thought that's what sisters did. I know. No. You don't. Because if you did, you wouldn't have tried to destroy me in front of 100 people just to prove you were better. I didn't, you did. You invited me to your wedding not out of family obligation, but because you wanted a live audience for your victory lap. She didn't deny it. I'm not angry anymore, I told her. But I'm not opening that door again either. Then I hung up. 2 months later, Delilah moved back to Roanoke. She tried launching a YouTube channel about healing from toxic relationships, but it never got past a handful of views. She started waitressing at a local cafe and kept her head down. Every so often, someone from home would mention her, and I'd just nod politely. I had no interest in revisiting her drama. As for Nolan, he quietly left his firm. Rumors were he tried to start a private practice, but with his reputation shot and connections fading, it never gained traction. The last I heard, he'd moved to Atlanta. He tried calling once. I didn't answer. Ronan and I kept things slow. After that night, there was no need to rush. We traveled. We cooked together. We fell into a life that felt easy, genuine, solid. We were at peace. A year later, he proposed. No grand gestures. Just a Sunday morning, pancakes on the stove, coffee in hand, and a simple, "Would you want to do this forever?" I said yes. Our wedding was small. 30 people. A garden in Asheville. My parents were there. So were a few close friends, a handful of colleagues, and no one who knew how to play a violin cover of Taylor Swift. There were no speeches about second choices. No digs. No spotlights. Just love. Genuine. Quiet. Whole.